Hello and welcome back to 209 Prep Sports. Back in the studio with Scott Bryant, just reviewing last week's games. Some of you may have noticed on our YouTube page that we have a new logo. We're working on implementing that as well as new intros and all of that stuff. But kind of a crazy, hectic season still. A lot of things going on, with each and every team. Games being scheduled, rescheduled again. We're not only dealing with some of the contact tracing with COVID, but the last couple of weeks, due to the fires, we've dealt with a lot of bad air quality and some heat and all of those types of things. So a lot of games got moved around. Fortunately for us, a lot of games were able to be played. A lot of concessions are being made, people giving away home games, and just for the ability to go down and play a football game somewhere else. I know that happened with Calaveras, was supposed to play at home, got smoked out, and they ended up playing down in Escalon on Friday night. So, and they weren't the only ones. A lot of games got moved to Monday, I think for the first time in a long time, maybe ever. There was a substantial amount. There were a substantial amount of games played on Monday night. Lincoln played, Franklin played, Hillmar played, Edison played, Bear Creek and Tokay played, Ripon and Sonora played, Modesto Byers. So there were a lot of games this last Monday just because probably there became a referee and officials issue getting enough officials for the games on Saturdays. So with that being said, we'll kind of jump into this. We'll kind of revisit what we do with this podcast. We cover the TCAL, we cover the SJ2A, the VOL, we cover Linden out of the SDL, the TVL and the MLL, and some of the Western schools as well. So as we get through some of these games, again, it's important to remember that a lot of teams are not putting in statistics. So it's difficult for us to do a podcast across, 50, 60, 70 schools or whatever it is. And there's no way that two of us can attend that many games. So the games we're able to attend in person, we'll have an actual visual. The games we're not, we're heavily dependent on statistics or any other input that we might have. So it's kind of where we're at this point.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate, we thought we're heading into a more normalized football season, and as we're quickly seeing, it's not your typical football season. We're absolutely thankful for the ability to play, and I think coaches across the valley will agree with that. But I think it's a constant adjustment for all the coaches. You're having to make decisions on the move. You're finding out a day before your game's being rescheduled to a Monday, or you're finding out that the school you're going to play is under COVID protocol and has to cancel. And we saw some cancellations this last week. We talked about some of those in week 0. It really is a big change. And, hats off to the coaches for being able to deal with that. I think one of the really big changes that just came out from the CIF, and this was out on August 31st, the commissioner came out, and they came out with kind of a new ruling, and I don't know how many people out there know about this yet, but I'm just going to read part of it, and it should paint really what it's about. It's a temporary suspension of CIF bylaw 504.m Sundays. As a result of the continued impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the conditions caused by the state's wildfires, the CIF is temporarily suspending bylaw 504.m for the 2021 fall sports season. The temporary suspension of this bylaw is only for competitions and not for practices or any other team activities. If a CIF competition is postponed directly due to documented COVID-19 cases, or the quarantine resulting from such cases, wildfires, or the poor quality resulting from such wildfires, other natural disasters, or declared emergency, the schools involved in those competitions may mutually agree to use the Sunday immediately following the postponement as a possible day to reschedule that competition. So I think that's a good ruling by the CIF. Anybody that's listening to this podcast knows I'm not a big fan of the CIF, but I think in this case they're doing the right thing. They're freeing up another day during the week, and in a season that we're seeing is rapidly developing into one of the strangest football seasons in recent memory, I think having a high school football game on a Sunday is kind of exciting, to a certain degree. And I think going back to your initial point, I think it also frees up some of the officials to be able to do those games. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And one more thing before we get into the scores, I think it's interesting to point out something that's happening on a national level. That's been the talk on ESPN. It's been the talk on most sports news channels right now in terms of high school football. And my new favorite high school football team, the Bishop Sycamore football team. Although they did disband this week, apparently, they pulled off maybe the upset of the century. And what I mean by that is they played IMG out of Florida, which is just a dominating football team, on ESPN, and they were able to pull it off even though that school doesn't actually exist. And that football team didn't actually exist. So to me, even though they didn't score a point, that's the upset of the week right there.
Well, and I think the worst part of that is the kids or men. There's talks that some of these guys are in their mid-20s that played on this team that's supposed to be a high school team, but it's a program that is an online school that doesn't have any classes. They wrote bad checks to the hotels that they stayed in to play IMG, and worse than that is they'd played the Friday before, so they played our Thursday before, so they had a 3-day sit between games. Even if they are all high school kids, I don't know. It's crazy the lengths people go to these days to get clout or run or whatever you want to call it, and it's I don't know. It's like you said, it's crazy that ESPN, nobody can work through or read through between the lines and realize that this team doesn't even really exist. So, but with that being said, there have been. I think I wholeheartedly agree with you on the new ruling to allow games on Sundays. We're just in a different time. I mean, there's for the ability for everybody to get a chance to play. You think about, you play on a Friday night. Kids have a contact trace, so their availability to play wouldn't even be till the following Sunday within a program. So it allows programs to potentially move games from Friday to Sunday, Friday to Monday. And so I think there were 6 or 7 or 18 games that went on this last Monday. I don't think that everybody was too excited about playing on a school night. That becomes somewhat difficult, especially if you're traveling a decent amount. And then you got to be back in school on Tuesday. You're a short week into your Friday game. There's just a lot of things that Monday game, represents for a high school program. I know at the collegiate level or the pros, it's just something different. But, at the high school level, to get prepared for your next game, you have basically 3.5 days to get ready for the next week. And if you cut one of those days off because you're playing, and then the next day you're really not going to be getting after it. So you really have 2 days to prep, or a day and a half, because Thursdays are a lot of walkthrough. You're not trying to be blowing guys up on Thursday night to play, and then you're playing a game on Friday. So Mondays become challenging. I think, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, there's just so many things going on. I mean, nobody could have thought or could have foreseen all of this. The smoke that we're getting from the wildfires, and prayers to all those people, and our thoughts go out to everybody losing their homes and lives. And, football is just a byproduct of high school, and it's, real life is happening all the way around us. And, I think the schools have done a fantastic job as far as working with each other to make sure these games happen. And again, with with this current surge in the Delta variant, I think schools have done a very, very good job with making sure that they're putting health and safety first, and not exposing people if not necessary. I think almost anybody I've heard of, there's not been somebody, we have a positive and we played anyway type of thing. If you have a positive, people are reporting it. We had contact traced our JV team 2 weeks in a row. I'm averaging about 6 or 7 guys a week on contact tracing, and it's tough to play games on Fridays, but you make do with what you have, and we're just in a different time. So with that being said, I'll jump off our first review of leagues. So we'll start with TCAL. The game of the week for almost anybody who was interested was the St. Mary's De La Salle game, and not necessarily from the competitive level. St. Mary's was trying to step up in competition, taking on the number 14 team in the nation, and they're number 14 in the nation for a reason. I went to that game, and they're dominant on both sides of the ball. They got a ton of team speed, ton of team size. Both of their defensive ends one was 6'6", 250, 260. One was 6'7", 260, 270.
Goodness.
They got a couple of guys that can just flat wheel. Zeke Berry is a Arizona commit, but has Michigan offers, and they got a couple other guys in their backfield that are just get after it. And so St. Mary's stuck with them pretty good through the first half. It was 17-16 going into half. They really had a chance to take the lead going into half. Herrera threw a late pick in the half, and De La Salle ends up taking a knee going into half, up 17-16. But I think the reality of it was that game was supposed to be played at 7 o'clock on Friday night, got moved to Saturday at 11 in the morning, got moved again to Saturday at 5 in the evening over at De La Salle. And those of you that are aware of the Bay Area, Concord doesn't really get hot, and it was 103 to start that game. St. Mary's is thin at the line. I think they run 8 or 9 guys on the line at the line, and so they were trying to go guys 2 ways, and one of their best guys, better linemen gets hurt in the first quarter. And so it was just a battle of attrition. They got into the second half. They got outscored 35-0 in the second half. They played with a ton of heart, but at the end of the day, the depth, they just couldn't keep up with the depth of what was going on. They did their best to double team, triple team Jaden Marshall, which opened it up for Jason Calvin, had an 80-yard touchdown reception. And then Wheatley had like a 20-yard or 30-yard reception. I think 7 or 8 guys caught the ball. So they tried to spread it around. They ran the ball well. They actually moved the ball very well in the first half. The second half was just a different story, and they just got hammered in the second half. There were no other games played on Friday. Pretty much everybody got smoked out Friday night. So most of the games were moved to Monday. Edison went to play Lodi. That game ends up being 28-0 final, but I wasn't there, but I heard that Edison didn't even score an offensive touchdown till the fourth quarter.
Well, it was late in the third quarter. It was 7-0. I think Lodi really played them tough, but depth wise, they I think they probably just got outmanned in the long run, but that says a lot about Lodi's program and where the coaching staff has gotten them. I think they're going to definitely be a lot better this year as we see them moving forward. A 28-0 score, I think, is not indicative of how well they played that game. So I think you're going to see good things from Lodi.
And George Duenas runs that Lodi program. They've done a really good job. They're tough. They're blue collar. Hard nosed. They get after it. Rolling into the next game, Tokay took on Bear Creek. Winning this game handily. We do have a box score, so we can go through some of the Tokay stats. You had Brandon Moreno was the starting quarterback. It looks like he was 7 for 9 for 80 yards, 103 quarterback rating with the 2 touchdowns and a pick. He also rushed for 41 yards. Barrett Crosby res for 11 carries for 77 yards. The younger Filippini brother rushed 9 times for 66 yards. And the high point receiver for them was Andrew Malgoza. Had 4 catches for 51 yards. Nobody scored a touchdown on the offensive side of the ball, but it looks like Tokay had their way with Bear Creek, and then I believe,
and that puts Tokay at they're 2-0, right?
Yeah, they're 2-0, and we played them in the spring. They're a solid team. Their head coach left, and then the coach that took over, he's really worked hard with these kids and made sure that they're sticking to what they're trying to accomplish there. So I was very impressed to see that score, and I was really impressed to see Lodi.
There's some pedigree in that. There's some pedigree in that Tokay coaching. I believe his father is Ken Rhodes, and Ken played locally at Tracy and then at Pacific, and then I believe he played. I think he had a cup of coffee in the NFL. So Ken went on to do a lot of coaching himself, and so. I can see how Tokay is really reaping the benefit of good coaching.
Yeah, and then do you have the Lincoln score? I clicked out of it and I don't have the Lincoln. I forget who they even played.
I know that they had to switch up. But just real quickly, while you're looking for that, I'll cover a couple other scores. Okay. We had. A team that I always get excited about when I see them winning is Franklin High School. They played Florin 27-0. That's a big win for them. Not we don't have any stats to post on there, but that's a pretty big win. And then Cesar Chavez out of Stockton plays Grace Davis and kind of runs into a buzzsaw. Final score is 36-7, but I don't think that's going to be indicative of the type of year Chavez is going to have. They've got some really talented kids on that team, and there's no question they're gonna have some victories this year. And then on let's see here, coming up this week for I'm just going to kind of go over the upcoming schedule for the SJAA since we kind of covered them. I think the SJAA and the TCAL matched up for the most part this week. Bear Creek's going to be playing Amador Valley. East Union is going to be playing McNair this week. East Union had the player of the week for us in week 0. Franklin, as I said, they're traveling to Denair. They're 1-1, and then Stags taking on Rio Americano.
It's just one of those weeks that I think it's, with games kind of being moved all over. There's been just a lot of, everybody kind of just trying to make things happen, and so I know it's difficult for the coaches and to get their rosters out and things like that. But it's, for us, we need to figure out a better way. Maybe, like I said, we'll be reaching out to some people to try to find some sideline guys or some people that are willing to give some insight into some of these games that are happening around the place. It looks like Lincoln did not end up playing this week. I think that they were supposed to go up to Pleasant Valley up in Chico, and I think last minute there was either a COVID or maybe a smoke issue with those teams as well. So it's, I think when we're the biggest thing for all of this that's going on at this point is really, and I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, is just to make sure, that we're, being grateful for the opportunity to have these games at all. We've just, my own program, we ended up playing on Sunday or Saturday, and the heat was an issue for both teams. We had a much deeper roster, but they just were a team that was very sound, very well coached, hard-nosed, didn't give in. One of those teams that they didn't really let the heat bother them. We kind of succumbed to the heat and let it kind of control our minds. And I don't even know if it was necessarily the heat, but with all the smoke, it just trapped all the heat in, and it became super, really humid. So, but moving on to the VOL. And Linden ends up losing that game 30-16. It was not a very well played game on our side, and they just had a ton of heart. I give all the credit to them. They came out and beat us. We didn't give that game away. But moving into the VOL, we have Mountain House played Weston Ranch. That game looked to be a very, very good game. 26-24. Weston Ranch scoring 20 points in the fourth quarter to take that win. I think the biggest thing for this game is, again, I think it was played on a Thursday, I believe. But you have Amari Brooks from Mountain House was 17 for 22 for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns with a 158 quarterback rating. I mean, that's pretty substantial. I mean, that's a hell of a game. Their leading rusher had 5 carries for 32 yards. Their leading receiver was Roy Gardner. He had 10 catches for 220 and a touchdown. And then D. Francis III had 6 catches for 147 and 2 touchdowns. On the Western Ranch side of the ball, Brown Sanger was 4 for 8 for 75 with an 82.8 quarterback rating, a touchdown, and a pick. He also rushed for 13 carries for 177 yards with a long run of 84, 3 touchdowns. The next leading carrier was DeAndre Levon. Had 7 carries for 47 yards. Leading receiver was Elijah Rivers with 35 yards. So that game was looked to be a pretty much an offensive showcase. Getting into the Manteca-Patterson game, Manteca ends up coming out of that game winning it pretty handily, 44-17. Garrison Reese was 7 for 12 for 120, 3 touchdowns, no picks, and a 131.9 quarterback rating. The leading rusher was Blake Nicholson, 11 carries, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. Blake's just on a streak right now that's second to none. Lionel Colon, who was very popular in the spring with our program, he was 18 carries, 86 yards, with the long run of 12 for a touchdown. The leading receiver, again, Blake Nicholson, 4 catches, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns. On the Patterson side of the ball, Jacob Guevara was 11 for 23 for 208, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Sean Hansen was the leading rusher, 17 carries for 75 yards, and the leading receiver was Javier Huezar, had 9 catches for 159 yards, 52 was the long, and a touchdown. So that again it looked like to be a very much of an offensive productive game.
Yeah.
And then I guess we'll just finish kind of here with East Union had 13 or lost to Windsor 42-13, and Sierra lost to Alcalinas 59-6.
Yeah, Sierra. A couple things here, kind of to bring up on the VOL. I think Sierra, again, that's just not indicative of that program. I think that they're having, and I apologize if I'm wrong on this, but I think they're having some issues with COVID protocols and those types of things, because that's a very well coached team. There's some really tremendous players on that team, so I don't think those scores are indicative of really what that program's all about. Going back to the Manteca scores, I think it's worth pointing out the quarterback, Garrison Reese at Manteca High School, is only a sophomore. And this kid's tearing it up. I believe, and again, if my intel is wrong, please someone let me know, but I believe Garrison Reese is the son of former head coach Eric Reese, who won multiple section championships there. So there's definitely some pedigree there, as Eric was a really good football player himself and even a better coach. But I think we're seeing some things being thrown off. Most obvious one is going to be Sierra. I think that's a surprise, and I think there's something else going on there, because that's not indicative of that program.
Yeah, I've talked to a few coaches. We've already had an issue with one of the teams in our league not being able to play one of the games. So I was just reaching out to a few coaches to try to line up our schedule to make sure we get our 10 contests in. And everybody, from the foothills to the valley, pretty much up and down the valley, everybody's dealing with it. And I think it's important to note, much like you just said, the COVID isn't, COVID obviously is an issue within our society, but within the games, we're not having COVID outbreaks per team. It's not like team's getting shut down. Just so everybody's on the same page, the school has to have 5% of the student population infected at the same time for the school to be shut down and go to distance learning. That's not happening in any of these schools, so we're not even at the 5% mark. So it's not like it's controlling what's going on. It's just the tracing. So if a kid comes in, they're mask to mask. It's an 8-day sit if there's a positive tracing within a kid, as long as if they're not vaccinated. So that's where you're seeing 10, 15, 20 kids from a program either not being able to practice or going to have to sit. I heard this week there's a couple of teams that are missing 6 or 7 guys to the game because of contact tracing. So it's somewhat unfair for the kid that's just going to school and doing what he's supposed to do, that's being exposed potentially by a student that doesn't play a sport. But it's the world we live in. We have to work with it, and we have to live with it, and we're going to be fine when we get through it. But it's going to be a process to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. With that said, we'll move into some of the scores from the TVL. A game that I thought would have a much different outcome than it did. Escalon and Calaveras. Escalon came out from the get-go, scored 14 points in the first quarter, and really just didn't look back from there. Final score is 41-0. As we take a look at the stats, the quarterback, I've always pronounced this incorrectly, so please somebody correct me, but Rosavink, quarterback, he was 10 of 17, 174 yards, 4 touchdowns. He came out with a quarterback rating of 133.3. An incredible performance against a good Calaveras football team. And when you look at the stat sheet for Escalon, this and you'll see this from some of the other TVL teams as well. You'll see that they really spread the wealth offensively, and this is what makes them such a good football team. Logan Anderson was a kid that we talked about last week that just put up some incredible numbers, and he did again this week. He was carried the ball 6 times, 71 yards. But then Bautista, who it's kind of like a two-pronged attack in their backfield, he put up 6 carries for 111 yards and a touchdown. And then Jameen Miller, who's a sophomore, he also got a touchdown. But Logan Anderson caught a touchdown. He had 2 receptions for 50 yards, and Bautista had another touchdown receiving on a 26-yard catch. And then their leading receiver was Owen Nash, who is another legacy player. His father played and wrestled at Escalon High School. So there's a lot of great players in that program. We could go on and talk about them. I wish we had, more programs reporting their statistics, just like Escalon is really good about doing that. Then we move down the highway, down to Houston. Houston plays Oristemba and buries them by a score of 37-6. No stats there for Houston. Really like to see what's going on statistically within that program. But, just as Frost had said in our preview, the TVL is really shaping up to be a battle to see who's going to win the championship there. Livingston put up a really, I think, a very respectable score against a bigger school, losing to Livermore 20-13. And then on Monday, we had Ripon was playing Sonora, ends up losing 32-20. And then Hillmar, another school that we've spent a considerable amount of time talking about and had their coach on last year, ended up winning 23-6. And this is where I want to go back to what my previous statement was about teams in the TVL, spreading it out and using everybody to win a football game. When you look at their statistics, you can't really single out any one kid as being the dominant player on that side of the football, but you can see a group of kids who have really put up some respectable statistics. And it, for lack of a better term, and maybe this is cliche, but it was definitely it's a group effort every time Hillmar steps on the field. And I know last year we talked about it. Their offensive line is very impressive. They're athletic. They do a great job, and so that's why you see Moak come in this year quarterback, and they're not missing a beat over last year. And so there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah, we're supposed to have Coach Santos on this last week, and we just with everything that's been going on, trying to get everything moving, we haven't had a chance to get him on, but we'll get him on again soon. And we talked to Frost, and we're very aware of that. The TVL, I'd put him up against anybody. I mean, really, any team in that league can play against anybody. Their offenses are difficult. They're a power run game, play action pass. They suck you in, and then they throw you over the top. And Escalon is one of those teams with a sophomore quarterback. They don't ask him to do a whole lot. As far as having to make huge reads or anything. I mean, really, it plays into him allowing the maturation process to happen. Kind of organically and not forcing it. So it's good for Donovan. And Donovan will he's a big kid, 6'2", 6'3", something like that. Can rip it pretty well. So hopefully it transitions or translates into him getting some opportunities at the next level. And Hillmar's, like you said, Hillmar's Hillmar. You go to Hillmar, and I think the team that's probably down a little bit this year, it looks like, is Ripon. In the TVL, you have Houston's a tough team. I mean, they're a smaller enrollment than some of those other schools, but they're just putting some classes together, and their youth program has been really good over the last couple of years, and there's a lot of buy-in in the town. And
there's a lot of common denominators between those programs. Like you said, the youth programs seem to be very strong year in and year out. I think some of the best coaching occurs at this level is occurring at some of those schools. Coach Beam's doing a great job at Escalon. He has a heck of a staff there. Coach Santos at Hillmar's doing a great job. I know Ripon, they lost Coach Johnson to Sierra recently, but I know Ripon's a well-coached football team. Houston obviously is a well-coached football team. They always have a good program down there. So I just think there's a lot of common denominators that contribute to their success. And if you're wanting to coach at that level or even in that league, sit down and take a look at what these guys are doing, because they're doing it right.
Well, we talked to Frost last week, and I think a lot of what happens at those schools is a lot of the players that leave and then they return back to the town. Now they have some experience at the collegiate level, and they come back and they coach. And so their staffs are made up of alumni, guys that have a lot of pride in the program, that have, the will to win. And you're seeing like that at Edison as well. Edison has a lot of alumni that's now returned. I mean, you're talking about not
NFL
collegiate guys. Yeah.
NFL alumni.
Yeah, that's a different breed there. I mean, they just get it, and they understand, how to get the most out of these kids and teach them the opportunities that they have. We spoke of their receiver, their tight end that has multiple offers. He's picked up even more since we spoke last week. So
that's incredible.
The one thing the one league we'll finish with is the MLL. The MLL's I feel sorry for these guys a little bit. Obviously we have a big spot in our heart for them. Scott and I both, as we compete, that's the league we competed in, and when we were in high school. But they're really suffering from the fires probably more than any other league in our section. Them being in the foothills, so having to move games and maybe not even getting games in. I think that Somerville, I'm not even sure they've even played a game yet. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are just going on. Like, again, you feel for them. Air quality is horrible there, so they're probably not getting to practice much. And so it's kind of hard to put a lot of onus on what the scores are. But Argonaut goes to Union Mine. They end up losing 27-22. Bo Davis, I believe that's Ricky Davis's son, was 6 for 10 for 78 yards, had 2 picks, but he also rushed for 62 yards. Colby Eckhart had 8 carries for 40 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Caleb McEfish had a touchdown on 6 carries. Their leading receiver was Colby Eckhart, had 3 catches for 58 yards. And then the other game we've already mentioned, Calaveras took it on the chin a little bit to Escalon. And Escalon, I mean, let's not get it twisted. Escalon can play. I mean, they're not just an ordinary team. I mean, they're a tough team, and again, with Calaveras probably suffering from not, lack of the ability to practice, probably affects that quite a bit. Not to take anything away from Escalon, but there's probably a little bit more going on behind the scenes that we know. And then the final game would be the Sonora Ripon game, which ended up looked like a pretty good game. Ripon kind of trying to get back in it late in the fourth quarter. Looked like Sonora wanted to run away with it early. And the final ends up being 32-20. There's just not, there's not a lot of stats for us to go through, just a score tracker. So we're not really sure, where, who the highlights are on that game. But a 32-20 game, and like we said, Ripon, I would have to imagine Ripon's going through some stuff as far as, COVID or something. They're probably missing quite a few guys. So.
Well, speaking of stats, when we take a holistic view of the stats, I think now it's time to start talking about player of the week or players of the week. But this year, I think we've got it pretty honed in. But I'm going to go over a couple of highlights here. So Mountain House really put some points on the board, had a great game, and they were led by quarterback Amari Brooks. He was 17-22, 347 yards. Average of 20.4 yards and threw for 3 touchdowns. Had almost a perfect quarterback rating of 158.1. Escalon, we talked about Rosavink. Again, I apologize. Please let me know how to pronounce that correctly. He was 10-17, 174 yards. Average of 17.4, 4 touchdowns. Quarterback ranking of 133.3. And then I bring up a third one, just because of the quarterback ranking, and I think performance-wise, we talked about him a little bit earlier. Garrison Reese, sophomore from Manteca, he was 7-12, 120 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He had a quarterback ranking of 131.9. When we're looking at running backs, again, please, coaches, parents, whoever, let's get these stats in, because I know there were some really big performances this week, but we can only go off of what was posted. But we go back, look at Western Ranch. Brown Sanger from Western Branch had 13 carries, 177 yards, average of 13.6, long of 84. He had 3 touchdowns. Bautista, the one of the dual threats they have in the backfield there. 6 carries, 111 yards, a long of 18.5, average of 18.5, and he had a touchdown. And then Manteca, Blake Nicholson, who's a junior. If you're a Manteca fan, there's a lot to be excited about there, because they're being led by underclassmen, and not to take anything away from their seniors. I'm sure they're being led by seniors, but their underclassmen are performing well. Blake Nicholson had 11 carries, 150 yards. A long of 68 and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Receiving-wise, Francis from Mountain House was 6 of 147. He had a 65-yard touchdown catch for a total of 2 touchdowns. And then he had his counterpart, Roy Gardner, also from Mountain House, had a heck of a game. 10 receptions, 220 yards, a long of 72, and he had a touchdown as well. And then coming back to Manteca, Blake Nicholson, 4 catches, 97 yards, along as 64, and put 2 more touchdowns on the board, which brings us to overall our 2 of our top performers, as previously mentioned, Brownshanger from Mountain House. He had a total of 252 yards. And from Manteca, Blake Nicholson had a total of 247 yards and 4 touchdowns, which I think we're both in agreement. Our 209 Prep Sports Player of the Week for Week 1, going back to Manteca, although it's a different school, is going to be Blake Nicholson. Congratulations. Again, it's worth repeating. He had 150 yards rushing, 97 yards receiving for a total of 247 and 4 touchdowns. And I'm sure he probably had some other highlights on the field as well, but congratulations to him.
Yeah, Blake. So my boys grew up playing youth with Blake, and Blake's always been the top guy, in any program he's at. And now he's 6'3" and 220 or whatever he is. He's the kid's put together pretty well. He runs well. He's got a few offers now, so it's good for Blake. As a junior, I'm sure he got some calls yesterday. September 1st being the first day that you can get calls of your junior year. So I'm sure he had a couple of colleges reaching out to him. He's kind of bulldozed his way onto the scene with, the camps and stuff, the camp season, going to these camps and showing up and showing out. He's got good wheels, a big stout kid, not afraid of contact. There's a lot to like with Blake Nicholson, and I wholeheartedly agree. So Blake will be getting a $20 gift certificate to Starbucks. We'll get that sent out to you. Luke Weaver, don't think we forgot about you. It's just been a rough week for us getting things up and going and trying to figure out how to get to where we need to be. So we'll be getting that sent out to you as well. I'll send it to your AD. So again, for us, it's exciting to have all these things going on, to be better if we can get some, a little bit better coverage as far as Max Preps goes. Coaches, you help your kids out, do them a favor and get their stats out there. A lot of colleges are looking to see what they're doing in these games, and that kind of affords them the opportunity to pull film, because they're seeing the success the kids having on the field and things like that. So I guess the one thing, and I guess Kimball didn't play this week because we didn't have a Nick Coronado sighting this week. So
it's weird. Yeah. I knew you had to get that in there because I think it's not a podcast unless we're talking about that kid, but he probably got some much needed rest.
Yeah.
So look forward to seeing him play this week.
A lot of good games this week. Tomorrow we'll get it hopping, and there's a lot of now we're better air quality. The heat's down, so the game should start to level out. We're starting to reach fall, so that's an exciting time for everybody. As league starts to approach, people got 2 more games or so before they start getting into league games. So things are starting to trudge along pretty good. It's exciting to have all this happening at the same time. As far as all these great games, I mean, now it seems like for the first time in a long time, these teams are just going to play whoever. They're gonna if it comes down to it, everybody's stepping up and and adding games that in the past we would have never seen. And
one last thing. I got one last thing to interject here. If you are a football coach and your team find out that they lost an opponent for this week, I think you can reach out to Bishop Sycamore. It sounds like they've got some openings on their schedule.
They all have IDs too. Say I am 12. But we're glad to have the listening and the viewership that we have. It's exciting for us. We'll continue to grow, continue to evolve. Hopefully we can get some coaches on or some players on next week. We'll start to as this season settles in a little bit better for everybody. But right now it becomes very hectic. I'm sure there's phone calls being made today, and you'll get on Twitter and start to see the changes that are made because some schools are testing, some schools have issues. So it's just the world we live in. So until next week, everybody, thank you for listening.